Somewhere off a European coast, in 2022, a guest steps aboard a vessel marketed as the first true six-star yacht on the water. He hands over roughly $1,900 for a single day at sea. Not for a week. For a day. The brochure calls it the bridge between a private charter and a commercial cruise, with the Ritz-Carlton name stamped onto the hull. On paper, the model looked effortless. A trusted luxury brand, an ultra-wealthy customer, and a premium nobody else in the market was selling. Today, that operation has accumulated $700 million in documented losses. It required a $275 million emergency bailout just to avoid defaulting on its debt, and it now floats on $918 million owed to two European banks. This is not a market fluctuation. It is a structural failure of the Hotel-to-Sea model. Let's open the ledger. The $700 million loss is the symptom. The mechanism is the assumption that a brand built on solid ground could be transplanted onto salt water without changing the arithmetic underneath it. Two columns define this entire story. The first column is the promise, six-star service, a $1,900 daily rate, over $1 billion in capital, and the Ritz-Carlton name treated as a guarantee. The second column is the balance sheet, empty cabins, deferred debt, and a formal warning issued by the company about itself. The distance between those two columns is the entire video. The math is not subtle. A luxury brand does not insulate a hull from the cost of running it. For the working sailor watching this, the lesson is the one you already paid for on your first refit. Salt water does not negotiate with a spreadsheet. Subscribe to Yachts and Boats. We read the financial reports and the lender disclosures so you do not have to take the brochure at its word. One question for the comments: how long until Crédit Agricole and CaixaBank finally call the loan? Drop your answer below. Now, back to 2017. The Ritz-Carlton Yacht Collection was unveiled that year not as a ship, but as a thesis about money. The thesis went like this. There is an ultra-high net worth maritime market sitting in a gap. On one side sits the private charter, total exclusivity, total cost, a yacht you book entirely for yourself. On the other side sits the commercial cruise, affordable, scaled, and crowded. The Ritz-Carlton believed it could stand in the middle. A six-star super yacht experience, smaller than a cruise ship, grander than a charter, carrying the most trusted name in luxury hospitality across open water. The logic was seductive because the brand was real. For decades, the Ritz-Carlton had charged a premium on land and collected it without resistance. The name itself was the product. A guest would pay roughly $1,900 a day, not for the cabin, but for the 3 words on the door. And the capital followed the logic. Over $1 billion in total funding has been injected into this project since its inception. That is the ideal column. A trusted brand, a clever market gap, a premium price, and $1 billion of conviction behind it. Now understand why that conviction was built for the wrong environment. On land, the Ritz-Carlton model works because the building does not move. A hotel sits on fixed ground, fills its rooms from an entire metropolitan population, and spreads its overhead across a city that never runs out of guests. The brand was engineered for that environment. Solid ground, dense demand, predictable cost. The decision in 2017 was to take a system built for concrete and float it on salt water. Hold on to that decision. It is the exact thing the ocean charged interest on. The promise hit the water in 2022. That is when operations officially began, and that is when the arithmetic stopped being theoretical. Here is the first mechanism, and it is the one the brochure could not survive. A 6-star yacht is sold on its crew to guest ratio. The entire premium depends on having a large, highly trained staff serving a small number of guests. That ratio is the product. But here is what that means mechanically. The crew is a fixed cost. You pay the full complement whether the cabins are full or empty. The fuel burns the same. The port fees are charged the same. The maintenance schedule does not pause because bookings were soft that quarter, and the hull depreciates in salt water on its own timeline, indifferent to occupancy. Now layer in the term that decides everything in this business: occupancy rate. That is simply the percentage of available cabins that are actually filled and paying on any given voyage. On land, a hotel can discount an empty room overnight and still cover the cost of cleaning it, because the marginal cost of one more guest is almost nothing. A yacht cannot do that. The yacht has already committed the crew, the fuel, and the route before a single guest boards. When the cabins sit empty, that enormous fixed cost does not shrink. It simply gets divided across fewer paying guests, and the cost per occupied cabin explodes. This is the trap, and it is structural. The Financial Times reporting confirms the core failure mechanism directly: unsustainably low occupancy rates. The overhead of maintaining superyacht level service does not scale down when the berths are unsold. A hotel-to-sea model assumes the sea will behave like a city. It does not. The maritime environment does not respect hospitality margins. So the same brand premium that justified $1,900 a day on a full ship becomes a financial anchor the moment that ship sails half empty. The promise was sold on the ratio. The ratio is exactly what made the losses unstoppable when the demand did not arrive. The brand could command the price. It could not command the bookings. Now, the record. Since operations launched in 2022, the company has accumulated $700 million in documented losses. $700 million. That is not a slow start. That is a structural hemorrhage built into the model from the first voyage. To stop a debt default, the controlling shareholders injected a $275 million emergency equity bailout. Read that carefully. The owners did not put that money in to expand the fleet or improve the product. They put it in to keep the company from breaching its loan agreements. Behind that bailout sit two lenders. Crédit Agricole and CaixaBank hold $918 million in outstanding debt against this operation. $918 million. And here is where the language of finance does the work. The banks agreed to relax their covenant terms. A covenant is simply a condition written into a loan, a financial threshold the borrower must keep meeting, or the lender gains the right to demand its money back early. When a company cannot meet a covenant, the loan is in breach, and the bank can call it. Rather than call it, the lenders relaxed the terms and deferred $171 million in repayments. They moved the goalposts and pushed the bill down the road. And the most damning entry in this entire ledger was written by the company itself. It has formally warned that it is likely to face further covenant breaches in 2026. The borrower is on record predicting its own failure to meet the terms it was just given. The promise was a 6-star product the market would reward. The record is a business surviving on injected equity and deferred debt, forecasting its next breach before it arrives. The pattern is not accidental. So name the betrayer. The betrayer is not a chef, a captain, or a deck crew. It is the incentive structure that treated a depreciating asset on salt water like a hotel tower on a city block. And watch what that structure is doing right now in the present tense. The lenders are not calling the loan. They are deferring repayment, relaxing covenants, and accepting an equity injection from the owners instead. The banks are, in effect, being paid to look away. Because calling $918 million on a business with $700 million in losses forces a write-down. Nobody at those banks wants to put on their own books, and the parent keeps injecting equity rather than letting the market render its verdict. $275 million to silence the covenants this year. A warned breach already waiting in 2026. Here is the question the filings raise but do not answer. At what point does the controlling shareholder stop funding the gap between a $1,900 daily rate and an empty cabin? That answer is not in the record yet. What is in the record is the direction of travel, and it points one way. The working sailor understands instinctively what the spreadsheet refused to accept. A boat is a depreciating asset that costs money every day it exists, full or empty. The corporation believed its brand could override that physics. The ocean sent the invoice anyway. So compress the two columns one final time. The promise was a billion-dollar brand commanding $1,900 a day, bridging the charter and the cruise. The reality is $700 million in losses, a $275 million bailout, $918 million in debt, $171 million deferred, and a company predicting its own breach in 2026. This is not an operational hiccup. It is a fundamental failure of arithmetic. And if you are the kind of viewer who runs the numbers before believing the brochure, here is the fix the Ritz-Carlton ignored. Treat any vessel as a depreciating asset first and a brand second. Before you ever value the name on the hull, value the fixed cost of running that hull empty. The crew, the fuel, the port fees, the saltwater maintenance, those costs are the truth. The brand is the markup. A name can raise the price. It cannot raise the occupancy. And a business that needs full cabins to survive while charging the rate that keeps cabins empty was never a luxury venture. It was a leveraged bet against the sea. The guests are paying a premium rate for a product that cannot be made financially viable. The owners are paying equity to keep the verdict from landing. The math runs in one direction. The Ritz-Carlton spent over $1 billion to learn what every working sailor learns on their first refit. A brand name does not insulate a hull from the ledger, and saltwater does not negotiate with a budget written on land. They are floating on $918 million of debt and the patience of two banks who would rather defer than write down. That patience is the only thing keeping the lights on. The ledger does not lie. Subscribe to Yachts and Boats. We read the financial reports so you do not have to. Drop a comment below. How long until the banks finally call the loan?